Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our panel discussion. This morning, many experts have touched on the topic regarding the sustainable supply chain in the Asia Pacific. And now we will move on to the panel discussion to reflect on a more practical approach to supply chain. And now I'd like to firstly invite the moderator to come up stage and take a seat. Please welcome Asia Pacific Lead for Offshore Wind at the UK Department for Business and Trade, Mr. Richard Burch, to come up stage. Welcome. And next, please welcome our panelist, Global Head of Supply Chain and Procurement at Northland Power, Mr. Martijn Heer. Head of Construction at Siemens Gamesa Offshore for Asia Pacific, Mr. John Colyer. Wind Taiwan, Mr. Wang. Procurement and Contracts Director at CIP Taiwan Round 3 Projects, Mr. Rune Damgaard. And Vice President, Taiwan Vestas Asia Pacific, Mr. Alex Robertson. Welcome. And I now turn the floor over to our moderator. Welcome.
Thank you, and good morning still. I'm Richard Burch, and I'm from the British office, and it's my pleasure to introduce the panel today. So maybe we'll sort of kick it off. There was, Martijn, you sort of focused on sustainability, so I thought I'd sort of pick that as a topic first. And perhaps I could come to you first as you were talking about that. I'd be interested to know sort of how you see offshore wind developers should address the important questions like sustainability in a way that's practical and the supply chain can actually deliver.
Yeah, so good question. If I go a little bit more global and I look at what's happening in Europe, I see a lot of cooperation also between governments. So we'll see the Netherlands together with Belgium and Denmark and Germany together combined working. And I think if I translate that back to APEC and see, okay, how can we deliver also a sustainable supply chain and sustainability in the supply chain, it's also, I think the countries should work better together. So take Taiwan together with Japan and Korea, forming more portfolio and working together on these important topics.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, I noticed in your presentation you talked about that there were some aspects which are sort of, I guess, the human rights approaches and sort of which are a bit more behavioral. And then there's this sort of another question about kind of climate change and issues around that. Do you think the approach needs to be different when you're addressing those two sort of separate issues at all?
Between the two, you think?
Yeah, yes. Particularly when you're thinking about the sort of the tier 2s and tier 3s in the supply chain.
Yeah, no, the supply chain, the approach shouldn't be that different. It's the way how you look at it. It's using a portfolio, using a leverage will help. When I approach suppliers separately on human rights, I get more done if I have a portfolio. I get more done when I have something also to discuss with them about. So in that sense, no. I do think, I showed a slide on the regulations, so the different regulations per countries. And I think governments can help also with the approach on human rights, etc., to implement such regulations and also here in the APEC region.
Rune, perhaps I'll come to you as the other sort of developer in the room. Do you have a perspective on sustainability and working with the supply chain?
So I think we have a track record from previous projects, so Shangfao Xidao and Xiangning, which I'm sure many of you know. I think our approach is that we collaborate with our key contractors, some being here with us today. I think we have promoted collaboration, we have helped wherever we can, we have co-invested, and we also foster joint ventures and facilitate joint ventures with established, experienced international suppliers who then combined with the local supply chain is then able to deliver. And I think we have seen a good handful of examples. That said, I also think there's still work to be done both from the supply chain downstream and maybe from developer support.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll sort of come to the supply chain companies yourselves when you're thinking about sort of this question of sustainability. Vincent, perhaps start with you from your perspective. What are the key questions that you're considering in terms of the sustainability of yourselves and your suppliers?
Thank you. I think all the suppliers that we cherish the long-term partnership. So business always goes the first. We need to get a profit for long term, as Alex said, not for the short term, not just for one country. We need to think about regionally and globally. So for us, for suppliers, we need to think about long term to meet the requirements and to meet the level of the cost that our employee may require in the future. So we see that the sustainability would be a long-term relationship and cooperate with regional suppliers in order we can utilize the advantage of all the suppliers in this region and globally to reduce our cost in order to serve our employer and make the project flies. I think that's the ultimate goal in the future.
Alex, do you have any thoughts on what you're doing in terms of the sustainability, whether that's environmental or sort of human rights, and how that feeds through into your supply chain?
Yeah, so Vestas is doing a lot on creating a sustainable supply chain on a global level, researching on recyclable blades and green steel and so on. But I want to touch on something else actually. Related to sustainable supply chain. I don't know how many people here have ever been to a offshore wind pre-assembly site, but if you've been, what you will see on the quayside is a phenomenal amount of steel. And I'm not talking about the turbines and the towers. I'm talking about the tooling and the equipment. And the vast majority of this equipment will get used for a few years and then scrapped because the turbines have changed so dramatically in such a short time from 3 megawatt turbines to what we're talking now about 15 megawatt turbines. So I think a big part about creating sustainability is also about stabilizing this breakneck growth of the technology so that everyone in the industry can extract a little bit more value out of the investments that we're making, and we don't have to make investments and making investments means consuming resources, and then just use them for a few years before the next turbine comes along and we have to chuck them away. And that applies to vessels, that applies to tooling, that applies to factory buildings, everything. So I think part of a sustainable offshore wind is also a stable offshore wind on the technology side.
Thank you. Ethan, from your perspective, and being at sort of a different level of the supply chain as well, I'm curious, what thoughts do you have? Are you exploring the sort of sustainability issues in your business? I guess sort of the marine sectors, this is an important issue across the world, isn't it? How are you thinking about this?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think just to echo on what Vincent mentioned earlier, one key issue is, or one key item would be the future outlook. And I would say looking into both short-term and long-term. For short-term, to see where the advantage we can get from, be it cabotage or the localization. But kind of based on that protection and how we foresee ourselves position in the wider region, how we can grow from not only just Taiwan, but beyond Taiwan. And the second thing I think is to maintain agile. So, because not only the offshore wind industry, but I believe same in other industry, the technology are moving very fast, and so does the regulation, I would say. So, having need to be agile and to adapt to the environment and different policies in different countries. And I think the last, but most importantly, as many others has mentioned also, is the partnership. How we could create a partnership and a reliable service to our clients, be it a developer or turbine OEM, then when they see the benefit of using these particular supply chain, then eventually we'll be able to get to other region and opt for longer cooperation.
Okay, thank you. John, do you want to add anything on sustainability? Is there anything more to add?
I think it's always interesting when your main competitor complains about the pace of technology development, right? But jokes aside, I think that's a really important point, you know. And one thing is around the materials that you need. From a Siemens perspective, we look increasingly at how we can modularize everything, reuse everything. Similar, we have recyclable blades, we have towers made out of different materials now, these technologies that are coming. If you think about it from the societal perspective, then I would say that health and safety is a good example. So one of our experiences coming to Taiwan is you have fantastic world-class companies, but you also have a lot of potentially capable suppliers who are lower down the maturity curve. So building on what Vincent said, you have to put in the short-term investment that costs money, time and effort to build that supply chain, and then over time, you know, you will reap the rewards. You know, you will end up with a good quality product, a good quality service, lower costs. But when you create a market, when you move into that market, the costs are higher as you have to go through that change.
Thank you. And so now I'll move on to sort of a few questions sort of about sort of supply chain development in Taiwan and issues around that. Alex, perhaps I'll start with you. You had some interesting thoughts in your presentation. I was wondering if you could sort of give us your views on what you think are the most important factors that could really make Taiwan an offshore wind regional hub.
I don't want to repeat too much of my presentation, but it has to be a focus on export and cost discipline. You know, a lot of this has to do with the government's policy, which puts very little emphasis on becoming cost competitive, and a lot of emphasis on you know, doing the maximum possible localization. And I've sat in many meetings with various parts of the government where we've discussed at great length, you know, what can be done to ensure that, you know, 5 of the hundreds of components that 5 items of one component that are not going to be produced in time we could get an exception to import those 5 items. And so much energy will be discussed on that, and no energy is going into discussing how on earth we get this component to be cost competitive. And, you know, for the long-term future of Taiwan, for the legacy that we're creating, who cares if 5 components were not delivered because the ramp-up of the factory was a bit slow? That doesn't matter. What matters is, did that factory get to the stage where it could export to Asia and become a sustainable plant? So I think, you know, it's about focus and leadership and rephrasing the question and having a vision for the future, which is a policy-free, highly localized product in Taiwan, which doesn't rely on the policy. And how do we get there?
John, come to you next. I guess because you're also sort of, you know, very impacted by the rules around supply chain development. What would your perspective be?
So in terms of the end goal, I would agree completely. You know, the way to this has to be to enable world-class manufacturing supply from Taiwan. And the way to enable that is not to overcomplicate things. It's not to introduce barriers. And I think that's where Taiwan has to be extremely careful in how it changes its policy moving forwards. Because ultimately, the minute you legislate and regulate for something, you're putting in an incentive. And if that incentive doesn't support your end goal, then you have a problem. And, people always say, the worst thing is a bad KPI. It drives the wrong performance. I think the other thing that I would highlight is it's really, really crucial that Taiwan focuses on the health of its domestic market, because that ends up being the foundation. If you're going to put a factory somewhere, if you're going to have a supply chain, you want to know that there's somewhere to supply to. And this goes into the fact that at the moment, if you compare APAC to Europe, for example, there isn't an integrated regional market. That would be a huge benefit, but at the moment it doesn't exist. So in order to develop that global world-beating supply chain that is needed, then there needs to be a strong domestic market, there needs to be simplification of the rules, and some of these barriers need to leave, and then you will grow a really effective local base.
Vincent, Ethan, I mean, you're both in a position where you're trying to build, a strong, sustainable, sort of locally based companies. Perhaps I could come to you, what do you think are the most important factors that would enable your companies to become, or part of a regional offshore wind hub?
Yeah, I think we dedicate ourselves into offshore wind quite earlier. It's not an easy journey. It's a very costly journey. And I think the suggestion to all other local suppliers we need to think the markets globally. We need to step out from localization. We need to think about the global market and international market. Because as I said during the presentation, we are competing with other countries for the limited development resource in the world for offshore wind. So the market is there. We are not only looking at the market in Taiwan. We have to look at the market in the world. I think that's the only way to get out and make money and get profit and change the world with the green energy. Even the hydrogen will be the future, but it will be later. But I think it will be still a very long journey in the future. But we need to do that step by step, but consider the market globally, not locally.
Yeah, thanks. I think to a certain extent, we, as you in Taiwan or IOG Group, we benefit from this localization policy. But in the very beginning, we didn't expect these will last too long, or we kind of prepare for the worst, which not lasting too long. So putting us or forcing us to think, like Vincent and the others says, how do we then be competitive in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, and how do we step out Taiwan and work together with our clients? And I think one thing quite important is, although by saying so, like looking at wider region, but we still very much hope Taiwan, this offshore wind industry will be expanding as expected. So a consistent policy from government sector, we believe is very important. So without that, without developer willing to invest here, I think a lot of the suppliers, they wouldn't be able to see the outlook, the future, then they'll be very hesitant to invest in this area, despite there are some sort of local protection. They will be still hesitate. So I think that would be a key for the industry in Taiwan.
Rune, do you want to?
I think it's an interesting question, and we promote our project as being the most expensive, and it's the most expensive for a reason. It is because it has a big burden of local supply chain, which is compulsory. So with that, I'm not saying we're not promoting localization, but the question is if it's sustainable in the current form. So right now, it works a bit like you have to exhaust all local capacity before you can go global. You could also imagine a more replication of what Europe or others have done, where you specialize in certain things, you become competitive, you can maybe even export it, and you import other things where you're less competitive. But in the current form, and with the current rules and regulations, the projects are at least twice as expensive as similar in Europe or in US.
Thank you. Martin, do you want to give your thoughts?
Yeah, building off what you said, I mean, they are very expensive, but that doesn't really matter if the off-taker is willing to pay for it. So if the off-taker is willing to pay for green energy, which is twice as expensive as in other regions, for me it's still okay. We're all here, also in this panel and in this group, to in the end make money, right? And that ends not at the developer. It doesn't end at me. I cannot develop a project and then sell off for a lower energy price while the localization rules and all the supply chain has increased a lot of their pricing. So I don't have to build unprofitable wind farms. And I think that is valid for all. So I'm fully with what is being said, but if the off-taker is willing to pay for it, then that's a given. But if the off-taker is not willing to pay for it, we need to change things. And I'm with you. Specialize in the things you're good at. We see that in other markets, so I won't dwell a lot about Europe, but in Europe, indeed, there are specializations. I'm Dutch. We like to go around the world in vessels. So the vessel market in Holland and Belgium is quite good, and they're specialized, and they're all over the world now. And I think that's a great example. Specialize in the things you're good at in one market, and then you're so competitive that in the APAC region, there are Dutch vessel owners operating. They're not just only in the Netherlands building the Dutch offshore wind farms. So yeah, I think take that example and then specialize in things you're good at.
Thank you. I'd next like to sort of come to each of you, really. I was going to ask you if you could give me an example of, a successful supply chain development story. And importantly, sort of what are the lessons you take away from that example? John, I'll start down this end.
In terms of an example of a market that's...
Well, or a company, or where you've seen a successful supply chain development sort of story, either in Taiwan or elsewhere.
I'll since I don't have any inspiration to go on from the others, then I'll simply go with the UK actually as a slightly generic market, because what the UK did is it created a very large volume, and while it encouraged local content and localization, it didn't really regulate it for it. But because of the size of the market and the natural reasons for growth, then what you find is in the UK, which, let's face it, is not these days considered a manufacturing superpower, you've got, for example, ourselves, who manufacture global blades out of Hull. In the service side, you have a number of suppliers globally who supply to projects globally. So simply by having a healthy domestic market, you will get local content that can then export, which is fundamentally the strategy that Taiwan should be going for and is going for.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Good example. Then I keep it domestic. I think we have seen evidence that Taiwan is mature to make onshore substations. And I think Vincent and Century has been on a journey where, although maybe the birth of jacket supply was complicated, they're now having a good, stable output. And I think they are on a promising journey. Maybe there's a little bit with the price at some point, but that I'll let Vincent take.
And what would you say is the lesson you take from that in terms of delivering supply chain development in Taiwan?
I think the lesson is that, first of all, it takes time to mature supply chain, especially on this magnitude, right? We are not doing bolts and nuts, we are doing big structures, we're doing turbines, we're doing blades. And then it needs to be a collaborative environment where we bring in experience from local, we bring in experience from international, and the recipe is to melt this together and then build on these success factors.
I wouldn't want to talk about our company, but maybe I would refer to John's presentation. I saw an interesting example about the logistic, the 7-star. I think that's a very good example in my mind, because that particular area is not mandated by any of the regulation, but we see it naturally established because I believe the OEM, turbine OEM, they see the needs of these services, and without being mandated by government, the local supplier, they see the benefit of providing it and adding together the human resources to support the clients and seeing that sector growing and growing. I think that's a very good example, coming back to what we talked about earlier. If we as a supplier become competitive, then naturally our clients will come to you for the service.
Martin.
Yeah, so we have actually a practical example, a great one, I think. We have cooperation with CDWE on a project on Hai Long. And soon, hopefully, the Green Jade as a vessel will be ready. And that's, I think, a great example of a local build cooperation with international expertise. So I think that is, to me, a great example that it can work. And this vessel can also be used for a regional thing, right? So it's something produced in Taiwan and can be exported also in the region. So a practical example of success, I would say.
And can you sort of pinpoint any sort of aspects that you think that were responsible for that success?
Oh, a lot of things. I think if I look now at the cooperation, we have a very good cooperation. So working together, it's in the end also a human business, right? So having good relationships, working good together with the supply chain is, I think, also a key aspect of that. I mean, maybe too practical, but the teams are also cycling together here in Taiwan. They have formed a group and they even sport together. And that is just a great example how you can also work together and build on relationships. And that is big key as well, I think, to the success.
Alex?
Yeah, so I've got, it's maybe a bit early to call it a success, but I want to give a very specific example that looks promising. In the round 3 rules, there was an optional bonus point available for localized tower paint. And it was optional. And we took a look at this and we spoke to some suppliers and we got some really interesting responses. And actually, I don't know whether it's, there's still a premium for the localization, there is still a cost element there, but it's actually one of our localized components for the 15 megawatt that looks relatively close to being actually, sensible and kind of organic. And let's see, still many years to go. Many things can go wrong, but that could actually be a really good, logical piece of localization. Now, why was it? Why did that work? Can you imagine if that had been a mandatory component? I can imagine it. I know how the supply chain would have reacted. The prices would have been 10 times as high. The hunger from the suppliers would have not been there. It would have been, the dynamic between customer and supplier would have been completely broken. So, I hate to admit this, but the free market is quite a powerful tool. And, this is a good example of how that's actually driving a more sustainable localization on that area. The other thing I would like to mention, a different success story, is I think the developers, we obviously have done our projects, most of our first projects with CIP, but I think this applies also to Hai Long and to other projects, have taken massive commitments, massive financial commitments to get this supply chain off the ground. And none of this would be here today if they didn't commit early. We started building that blade factory, I think, or groundbreaking was in 2020 or something. And that there was a level of significant level of commitment from CIP to MBAO at that time, and I think I'm sure it's the same for Hailong and the Siemens factory. So I think we should underestimate the value that the developers play in this market. They spend a lot of money, they bring a lot of expertise, and they turn this vision of low carbon, sustainable energy independence for Taiwan into reality, so I have to give them a little bit of credit, just a small amount of credit. Most of the credit belongs to the OEMs. I would say 95% of the credit is for Siemens investors, maybe 5% is for our customers.
Yeah, actually I can share maybe two examples I think is success. One is a local, the Seawind, I think Ethan is there. I think they're starting from a very small company with only small vessels. But they grow up, they are stepping into different category of the offshore wind vessels and the training. I think is, grabbing to the global. I think that the success key for them. And another one I would say that like a Century, they are the Senkong. They are from South Korea. Senkong is actually a very interesting example because they came from a shipyard nearly getting bankrupt, but they stepped into the offshore wind and they did some very significant output on foundations. But I think the Korea supply chain in Korea and in Taiwan is quite different because they have very healthy supply chain because they are a very good supplier for shipbuilding. They have a very good history for shipbuilding, so they have plenty supply chains available to support Senkong. And I think the good lesson learned from Senkong is they are keeping growing right now, even they are kind of merged by a very big group in Korea, but they are already expanding themselves for the next phase. They are considering, they are already stepping into the floating in the future, in very near future. I think they are expanding maybe twice or 3 times bigger for floating in the future. I think they are keeping growing. I think that's some kind of example we have to learn and we are following. And I know some of you maybe think we are kind of competitive. We and Senkong, we are competitive. Actually, we are not. We are kind of partners in the future, even in the future. We both already see that the future requirements is kind of huge requirement. We have to support with each other because they will run out of their capacity. We will run out of capacity. So eventually, we need to help with each other in the future. So that's the kind of I think tomorrow that be a kind of regional supply chain supporting with each other to make the offshore wind project fly.
Thank you. And then I wanted to again ask you sort of all the same question, and that was, if you could at this point, if you could make one change to the policy framework in Taiwan in terms of supply chain developments, what would that change be? Maybe I'll start with the developers this time. Rune.
Yeah, good question. I think I would simplify the regime. So really pencil down 3 to 5 things and say, this is where we focus, this is where we excel, this is where we can become competitive, even regional, global, and then we make it more selective so it becomes a competitive market. But 3 to 5 things and focus on them.
Martijn.
Yeah, I agree. For the next rounds, I mean, we're doing projects all over the globe, and somebody was explaining me the point system, and then we get these points and additional points for this and that, and I got the whole slide, and I felt a bit stupid because it took quite a while for me to understand. Oh, then this and this, okay. So simplify it a bit. I would fully agree. That would definitely be one thing, and we see it in different auctions around the globe, right? So we see in different regulations that things can be simplified.
Maybe Vincent.
I think comparing with other countries, the government in other countries, our government is kind of flexible to listen the opinion from from everyone of us here. But if want to say something about the regulatory, I would say that the surcharge on the port, harbor, load in, load on, and also the transportation fee, I think is something need to be reviewed.
Yeah, I agree. No, I've forgotten what I was going to say. I'm sure. What was it? Yes. Actually, we've talked a lot about supply chain and localization, and there's a lot of stuff we could change there to improve the situation. But actually, I don't think it would necessarily move the needle. My biggest fear is that projects are not going to get built, are not going to reach financial close, and are not going to get built. And, you know, for better or for worse, the supply chain on this stand have all made big investments in Taiwan. And if we don't use those investments to build things, they are going to be very costly for us. So my number one concern is projects reaching financial close, and that seems to be stretched at the moment. And so if I had one change, I would probably wish for some kind of off-taker of last resort, some kind of minimum price off-taker that the banks could accept, and that would mean that you know, the bankability of a project was not entirely linked to the financial strength of the corporate off-taker. Some kind of mechanism like that would really move the needle on bankability of projects. And I think we need a big move, like tweaking the local content, shaving off a few % here and there from the project cost. That ain't going to change the situation we're in now. We need something fundamental to ensure that, you know, that not every project has to go through what Hai Long has gone through. You know, like I really hope, and I'm sure Hai Long will soon reach financial close, but like that level to go, like that level of commitment before getting to financial close, it's awful. Like that shouldn't be the kind of expectation of how to get a project built in Taiwan, is that you have to like basically pay for most of it, you know, on yourself, and eventually the banks will step in at the end of the day. Like that's not sustainable at all. So yeah, that would be my ask. Off-taker of last resort.
Ethan, do you want to?
Yeah, I think one thing I would say, which is still, it's not too late now, is having a leading government sector to unify and drive through all these required regulational changes. Because I appreciate that we can't be fully prepared then move, but there are still a lot of regulation which isn't the same as we see in other countries. Take, for example, the vessel operation. There are still some area where making the vessel operator has to operate in a gray area. And same goes to the like offshore technician. They're still not allowed to work similar to European, like 28 days on, 28 days off, etc., which kind of disabling us to, again, become competitive if we want to export. So I think that would be an area we will strongly advocate the government to look at if we still want to drive forward. Yeah.
Okay, so some really good suggestions. I think I would agree with them all. The fundamental theme there, if I understand it right, is the top line isn't quite where it should be, and the complexity and other challenges lift the bottom line up. One other thing that I know is being looked at, but I would say is absolutely critical, is really increasing the size of the projects. Because from where I sit, increasing that size, you just simply get a massive impact on your economy of scale. If you think about it very simply, if you're going to build a project, you've got to mobilize a site, you've got to pay for that, you've got to have your project planning, you've got to have your project team, you've got years of work and overheads. And that exists if you're building one turbine or you're building 100 turbines. And if you're building 100 turbines, to simplify it, you build the first and you repeat it another 99 times. So, you know, you can achieve massive economies of scale on your bottom line simply by increasing the size of the project. And then that has a knock-on impact in terms of giving more security to the market. You fill those factories that everybody's contributed to, and you give the wider industry the security and certainty that will enable the growth globally and the export.
Thank you. And I just wanted to, build on sort of point that a lot of you made about the importance of exports and creating a sustainable sort of export-focused supply chain. I mean, when I look at Europe and I see a lot of supply chain integration and a lot of trade across borders, and I wanted to sort of get particularly those who've got experience of Europe to get your perspective on how important that was for the supply chain development in Europe. And I guess the second question related to that is really, what opportunity do you see for that to be replicated, particularly in Northeast Asia, where we've got 3 markets that are in a fairly similar position? Do you think that this could become a similarly integrated offshore wind zone? Maybe Vincent, yeah, do you want to go?
Okay, from the foundation fabricator perspective, our partner, Blade Industry in Europe, actually they did the same arrangement. They purchased a lot of components. They purchased TP, they purchased brace, they purchased legs from everywhere and assemble into one jacket. But in Taiwan, we fabricate everything from zero. But I think that the story will be changed because eventually we need a collaboration, regional collaboration, even global collaboration. So I do think that in the future, that in Asia, that our supply chain, we need to supply with each other, so we can utilizing all the advantages we are having right now. Like we have Senkong, we have other factory, we have other partners in Vietnam or Indonesia. So that's also a reason why we are stepping out to set up our factory outside of Taiwan, because we need to kind of support to supply our components for ourselves in the future, and Taiwan need to also export our components to support our other wind farms in the world. The demand is there. We already received several requirements. Business always go first. That's the reason why we had a discussion with Senkong and other factories, because we are already in the partnership discussion right now. So it's happening. It's already happening right now.
John, do you want to give your perspective on this, particularly coming from Europe?
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of Europe, I mean, that's been the biggest enabler to the growth, really, because if you've got an active market in one country, then it doesn't matter if your home market isn't running, because your people, your product can go to the other market with minimal barriers. And this is one of the things that raises the cost, raises the risk and the complexity in APAC. I mean, if you have a project delay, and we know that's never happened in Taiwan, for example, but you need to bring people in. Well, then you've got a lead time on your work permits. We want to bring Taiwanese people into Japan to work on the wind farms there. So if you suddenly need more people, you've got a 3-4 month lead time on moving them. So, I mean, if we're thinking about the supply chain, the importance of having a industrial policy for wind that spans the region, spans the wider market, there are huge opportunities because simply it will make the projects healthier. Governments will get closer to their impossible dream of local content at competitive European prices.
Yes, I indeed think you can replicate what they did in Europe. I think, it also matured from something years back when the turbines were as small as onshore turbines maybe is now offshore. I think you need to look at the policy, the whole framework. I think Taiwan praises, and rightfully so, themselves that they were a bit of a front runner. I think we're still to see what is happening in Korea, Japan, and the likes. But surely I think there would be huge opportunities in collaborating and in specializing among the regions and also among the countries in the regions. And I think it would foster a more healthy competition.
And Ethan, are you optimistic about the opportunities for regional and international growth?
Yeah, I think I'm relatively optimistic, and maybe to share a bit of our company as an example, as Vincent earlier mentioned, because we are a joint venture company, as some of you might be aware of, and that's not an easy journey, firstly to say, but I think that comes back to knowing where the strength and weakness of each industry or each country has, and be open-minded about that, and be again agile to support on where those countries they are not good at, and support them at those area, and again coming back to the partnership. So I think these two are the key factors that we see, and what we're trying to replicate what our experience into other countries.
Yeah, sure. So what did Europe do? They've been to a massive growth as well, from the beginning with the small turbines, now also. But key for Europe success story was standardization and repetitiveness. So repeat constantly. Installers want to have a pipeline and repetitively install, because that brings the cost down. And that standardization and repetitiveness has contributed to the success. And it's called the supply chain. It's a chain. So not only the supply, but the chain of things. And the chain is the suppliers need to be able to foresee a future, also to make their investment. And their suppliers need to make their investments based on the chain. And that ends with a portfolio and repetitiveness. So I think that are the key things what we've seen in Europe in the growth, and has contributed a lot in that market. And that's something indeed to repeat in APAC. If we have to tender, for example, for smaller lot size in different countries in the APAC region, the repetitiveness is gone. It's very difficult to call a T&I installation company and says, yeah, I have 300 megawatts somewhere. Can you please come during high season? And they will look at me and say, Martijn, we're global. In other regions, I can do 1,000 or 2 gigawatts. So why should I come for 300 megawatts to a different country? So that's I think, something to bring in this region as well.
And Alex, I mean, you started by talking about Taiwan sort of exporting the localization framework to some degree. Does that concern you about the region generally? And
not really. I mean, long term, it's inevitable. Like that, you know, put your head forward 10, 15 years, there will be a pan-Asian supply chain. That's clear. I think the market forces will prevail. The question is, how much of that supply chain will Taiwan have a piece of? And you know, I think now is the time, with the first mover advantage that Taiwan has. Now is the time to make sure that we get a big chunk of that value in Taiwan. But the long-term trajectory, there's no avoiding it. There's not going to be a bunch of little island supply chains in Asia. No way.
Vincent, is there anything you wanted to add? Yeah, sorry, you've written it. I guess now's a good opportunity to open to the floor. I just wonder if there's any questions that anybody from the audience would like to ask our esteemed panel. Yifeng?
You mentioned, Alex, you mentioned at the beginning, it was mentioned earlier that the European markets, the American markets are also heating up and catching up. So how do you see that competition outside of the region?
Comment on that? I think it's probably, you know, actually the biggest thing that's going on right now, and the biggest threat to the whole of Asian offshore and the progress of Asian offshore is the booming European market, and that affects the supply chain, it affects access to resources, affects the priorities of customers like yourself. So yeah, I think it's a very significant global situation. I mean, long term, of course, things will correct themselves, and the whole supply chain will scale, and the talent pool will scale, and there'll be capacity for everyone to have all of their offshore dreams realized. But no, in the short term, I think it's a very real issue.
Anybody else want to add anything? Please.
Hi. This question is directed specifically to the developers on stage, Rune, Martijn. We have two top-tier wind turbine OEMs, representatives and suppliers here. That is never good for the supply chain. It's always good to have a larger pool of things. If they are where they are, it's also because of their merits, of their large investments in R&D, in production sites, etc., etc. But how do you see the future of OEMs? I'm not talking about scaling up in wind turbine sizes. That can be a whole other discussion. But rather, how do you see the future? We see now in Korea, GE teaming up with a local player. They're doing the same thing in Japan. We are seeing some other, I would say, more exotic players coming onto the market. Nevertheless, I mean, we need suppliers to deliver the amounts that will help us meet those targets that our governments have set. But then from a price and negotiation point of view, you want a wider pool of suppliers. Same is true for cable manufacturers, by the way. So I'd like to have your take on that, and how do you see the future?
Shall I start?
Dank u wel.
Yeah, good question, thanks. How do I see the future? I mean, typical classical procurement is indeed we like a lot of suppliers, and then we tender everything out of it, and then we get the lowest price. That is classical procurement, and some really love to do it. But the other thing is, if we have this market, and they are where they are, and we are where we are in this market, right? Then maybe we should change things and not tender the hell out of it, but work strategically more together and have strategic cooperations with the OEMs and work on a different basis than tender price and then tender price and what we see globally. We are tendering, and then suppliers are coming back with price increases. And then you think, yeah, but you wouldn't have won this tender if you've done this. So I think it calls for a different way of cooperation. It calls for not the classic procurement models, but looking more in a strategic relationship.
I can echo Martijn on the partnerships, the collaboration, the fostering of longer-term view. But I do also, looking at the helicopter, see an issue simply on the sheer ability to supply the demand. And this goes for global, where I think there is such high demand right now, especially Europe, US are pulling, which means there's probably less of the cake for us to take here. If we then zoom in and look at the local, like the framework the government applies now is that they basically say it's compulsory to localize what the supply chain can deliver. That means that any failure to deliver 100% means that there is not enough for us. So that combined is an issue to make the puzzle work. And what it will trip into in the end is that we won't reach financial close because we cannot demonstrate that we have a viable project. So yes, I do worry about these points, and I do worry about the attractiveness of particular Taiwan, partly with the smaller projects, partly with the complexity. Will that still attract the necessary suppliers and contractors?
I just want to respond. So firstly, I'm very pleased there are two suppliers in Taiwan. local content policies have a habit of promoting monopolies. So, you know, 2 is still better than 1. I actually don't think that what's going on in the market is driven by there not being enough competition on the OEM side. There could be 10 suppliers, but as long as they're all making, you know, double-digit negative EBIT, you know, it doesn't make any difference. You know, Vestas, you know, much to the frustration of anybody who tries to buy Vestas turbines, and I'm sure it's the same for my competitor here, have increased prices a lot over the last 24 months. That's not coming out of the competitive dynamic. It's not like, oh, great, we've got a duopoly, let's see how much money we can make. It's like, how do we stop being a non-profit organization, which we have been for a while now. So I actually think the lack of profitability of the OEMs is what's driving the capacity constraints that are coming in the market. If we were both making a bit more money, we'd be much more relaxed about making bigger investments in supply chain. So I think there is no sustainable offshore industry without sustainably profitable wind OEMs. And maybe that's not always fun for the procurement people, but it's just the reality. We've all got to make a bit of money in this world.
Probably time for one more question, if there's anybody. No? Well, we've gone past 12:30 anyway, so maybe we'll break there for lunch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite our guests to please come forward to the stage for a quick group photo. Thank you very much. You may just leave the microphones on your seat. Thank you. All right, please look forward at our photographer in the front. First picture, 1, 2, 3. The next one, please give us a thumb up. Okay, wonderful. Okay, once again, thank you very much for the wonderful panel discussion. You may return to your seat. And ladies and gentlemen, please, thank you very much. We will now take a break. Refreshments and beverages are provided at the corridor. Please enjoy and do return to the conference room by 1:10 in the afternoon for our next session. Thank you very much. See you later.